mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou, I tēnei ahi ahi. Welcome and good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you. I'm taking my mask off just like they do on television. So I'm far enough away from you that even if I sneeze, you shouldn't get anything, but I won't sneeze. My name is Margaret, and it's my role as convener of the South Alive Housing Action Group to welcome you all here this evening. Thank you for attending this special evening, which is part of our program to explore alternative housing options. With the summer break coming up and travel restricted to within our own country, it was felt that where to stay when exploring our wonderful land would be appropriate. So tonight we're going to hear about accommodation opportunities in the outback. First though, some housekeeping. In keeping with level 2 COVID restrictions, I hope you took advantage of the hand sanitizer when you arrived. And as you've booked your places here, we have you on our list. That's enough for the tracing process, although some of you photographed the little thingy that they have to do. That's okay. Mask wearing for attendees is mandatory, however. In the event of a fire, there are 2 exits. The one you came in and the one just here. So, sir behind clear, can you be like the aeroplane and responsible for the door and throw them out as they come past? Thank you very much. The assembly point is over in the car park at the mall. Toilets can be found down the corridor to the left. Before you get to the shop, please don't try to get through the shop. They have a very excruciating security whistle, and it costs a bit to get people out to turn it off. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold is the order of the day. Yeah. You'll also have to move away from the glassed areas, so we've got a lot of it, maybe down this end or in the back of the foyer. When the shaking stops, we'll reassess the situation. For your information, as you can see, the presentations are being filmed and will eventually appear on the South Alive YouTube. You, the audience, will not be filmed, so that takes care of any privacy issues if you're here and somebody doesn't know about it. Our group has always wanted to bring this series free of charge to you. We started back in October last year. At that time, many people said we should charge because the series was so good, but we've resisted that, but would welcome any koha as you go. It would help to pay for the advertising. Which brings me to my next question. We're always assessing the best way to let the public know these events are on. So I'll do a little survey and you may answer more than once. How many saw the advert in the Express? Only 2. Oh, they might lose our custom. On Facebook? Right. And the poster here or in the hallway? No. Heard it on the radio? Oh, okay. Word of mouth? 50-50. Okay. Anybody, any other way that I haven't mentioned?
Your email list.
Emailed, okay.
Your email list that you put out there seems to happen.
Oh, okay. So I personally don't do that.
I think
Claire in the office, she's very good at that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, I should write that one down. Finally, please raise your hand if this is the first time you have been to this venue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We always get at least 8 new ones. That is amazing. Welcome, 1,000 welcomes to you. Take note, enjoy, be in awe of this community facility. Shortly I'll introduce the presentation team. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions from the floor after each speaker. And we do ask that you wait till the end because your question may be asked somewhere further along in the presentation. Sadly, we cannot offer a cup of tea at the end, but you are welcome to chat for a little while afterwards. So without further ado, let me introduce our presenters for tonight. We're going to hear from Erik Bradshaw by Zoom tonight. There he is up there. He lives in Arrowtown with his 2 children and his wife Christine, who is described on the Google item that I looked at as one who is amazingly tolerant, who patiently accepts and encourages Erik to pursue the ambitious ideas he dreams up. And it appears that one of those ambitions is to traverse mountain ranges. Yes? Tonight we will hear how those experiences have influenced his thinking and his actions. Marie is our technician and she's going to zoom him in. Enjoy.
Right, hello. I gather everyone can hear me properly?
Yes.
At the back?
Yep, great. Well, thank you for the good introduction, and I'll pass the flattering comments on to my wife. She is incredibly tolerant. So what I'm talking about tonight is this thing called a turk, which is kind of something I invented, but having said that, I wasn't the first person to invent something like this. Basically, it's a structure, a hut. Well, for me, it's a hut for the mountains, but it could be a structure anywhere, a sleep out in someone's backyard, a place for someone to live. But the crucial thing about it is it's based on a plastic water tank, which from a design and build perspective gives many advantages. So what I thought I'd do is I would step through sort of the aspects of a turk, like the outside design, the inside design, some of the engineering things that have gone into it, the build process and the installation process. And I wasn't really going to sort of delve into too much detail about where these things are actually installed, but I'm more than happy to share that. I sort of saw this more as a presentation about sort of building and building concepts. So just to explain where the word turk came from, well, really when I first invented this thing, we installed a sort of prototype up in the hills behind Arrowtown, and it really didn't have any consents or permits or anything like that. And I was quite worried a building inspector would come and knock on my door and give me a good telling off. So I decided I needed to invent a name that would suitably confuse them. And so instead of calling it a mountain hut or a shelter or something like that, I called it a turk. And the name had sort of two roots. One, it came from a little sort of rhyme I worked out, which is, well, it's not a hut, and it's not a yurt, and it's not a tank, so it must be a turk. So it's a slight play on words, and also just the shape of it reminded me of those things called ottomans that you rest your feet on. And Ottomans, of course, is the Turkish Empire. So hence the name Turk. And it seems to have caught on, actually. When I first sort of dreamt up the name, I thought, oh, maybe it's just me being odd. And then when you invent a word and people start repeating it back to you, you know you've actually got the word right. So just in this picture here, this is one of the Turks. It's on a place called Mount St. Just. So just if we look at it here, you can see basically it's based on a large plastic water tank. It's a 26,000 litre RX Plastics water tank. That particular manufacturer I deliberately chose for various sort of structural reasons. You can see in the front of it, it's got a small deck. It's got two water tanks. It's got a plastic, it's got a gutter, which is welded onto it. And also it's got that black panel, which in this photo isn't actually quite complete, but that's part of a sort of, really a bit of a heat management system, which I'm still working on and refining. So I'll just go through a few more pictures. Sorry, oops, oopsie. Here's another photo. Again, at the outside, you can see the door, and this is a grey turk. One of the things we found when we went through the resource consent process is that because we're under Queenstown Lakes District Council, and this land was deemed landscapes of high natural importance. Therefore, we had to go through quite a decent resource consent process, and in some of the sites they said, oh, we want a grey one here because it blends in with the rocks better, and other ones we said we want a beige one because it blends in with the tussock. It'd actually be a lot easier if we were in Southland. They don't have the same restrictions. But looking at this photo here, you can see, again, the two water tanks on either side of it. You can see the door. The door has quite a lot of weatherproofing because this is an alpine environment, and in winter it will get quite buried by snow. There's a small seat in the foreground, sort of outside, sitting on top of this deck. And one thing about all of these designs is I've kind of taken a Henry Ford approach to the design, and I've said, well, if I make everything identical, then if we need to replace a door or anything, it's identical across all the turks we have in the mountains. So actually, just to backtrack, we currently have 6 of these in the mountains of New Zealand. There's 3 of them in the Antarctic, and there's another one at Mid-Dome, which was put in for the forestry people doing the wilding pine control around Mid-Dome. You can also see in this photo, I'm not sure if it's on your left or right, it's on my right, you can see the wee solar panel above the water tank. And I'll explain a bit more about how this is connected up. But one of the key things about a Turk is they are designed to be such that they can be easily lifted by a helicopter. And this here, we typically, when we've flown them in, we've been using a Squirrel B3. The weight of the Turk is typically about 900 kilograms or a tonne, and generally speaking, the pilot's quite happy as long as we keep it below about 1.1 tonnes flying it with the Squirrel B3. And again, because altitude has a bit of an impact, they could easily lift more at sea level, but because we're flying these into about 1,700 metres, we just need to get the weight right. So, and I'll explain, how the anchoring system works as we carry on. Sorry. Again, another photo of the outside. You can see the deck, the 2 water tanks, and the solar panel. Yeah. So just as I said before, there's 6 of these. Well, there's actually 7 in the mountains of New Zealand. As part of building these, I set up something called the Mountain Turk Club, which is a structure to own and build these. So my interest in these has really been from an amateur sort of backcountry point of view. There probably is a commercial opportunity to make these, but I've already got one business that employs 10 people, and it's a software programming business, and I'm not too excited about setting up another business and trying to make something out of this design. So for me, it's very much a recreational project. And also, this is a picture of one of the 3 which is down in the Antarctic. So this is Cape Adare, which is sort of at the northern tip of the Ross Sea, and that structure on the left, you can see that the Turk is a grey one on the foreground. The structure on the left is Borchgrevink's hut, which was the first structure ever built on the Antarctic, and they were installed in conjunction with the Antarctic Heritage Trust so they could do restoration on that hut, because although Borchgrevink isn't as famous as Shackleton or Scott, his significance in Antarctic exploration is equal to Shackleton and Scott. He was the first person to ever winter over, and that in itself was a huge adventure. And we installed these about 2.5 years ago, and we did them it was New Zealand working in combination with the Chinese. We're using a Chinese icebreaker to install them. So I'll just go through a bit of the interior design, these are a couple of CAD images. So when I started on this project, I've for years I've been thinking, right, how can I make a low-cost hut for installation in the backcountry? And I've thought about this for over a decade, and then I sort of thought, well, why not use a plastic water tank? And I did a bit of research and realised I wasn't the first. People had done it in the sub-Antarctic, so I don't think they've done it to the same standard as I had. But I certainly wasn't the first. So I sort of spent a lot of time on, CAD, computer-aided design, trying to work out the dimensions and whether it was worth investing the effort and how people would fit inside it. But in this basic layout, which is what I came up with, has been refined, but it hasn't changed significantly. One of these Turks is just slightly under 10 square metres of floor area. They contain 4 bunks. We also have 2 additional mattresses so people can sleep on the floor. Robin, who's talking as well tonight, has spent several nights in them as well, so you can quiz him as well as me. And typically the design is a radial design in that, each of those bunks takes up 90 degrees, the bench takes up also 90 degrees, and then you have the door and various other features which I'll show you. Again, this is just another CAD design. This was, again, for me, very early on in the picture, where I was trying to just work out whether this kind of space would work, because the first one I built was, I shouldn't say entirely my own money, I should say it was my family's money. So when we built the first one, it was kind of like, well, am I throwing, $10,000 away, or is this thing actually going to work? And I must say, I was amazed how well it worked after building the first one. The first one, you can't really, you can design as much as you like on a computer, but it's only when you build something in reality that you can really get an appreciation of how well the space works. So trying to work through it was a sort of complex balance of the sort of efficiency of the space was one thing. Trying to work through the engineering and safety aspects to make this a fully legitimate structure, which was signed off by an engineer and signed off by a council. I mean, the first one I made was a bit of an experiment, and it wasn't, but my experience in developing the ones for the Antarctic put me in touch with an engineer who was, adventurous enough to work through the design. And I'll explain some of the things we went through. Also, it had to be cheap. Like these Turks, the recent ones we've been making, which are fully insulated and double glazed, and we've got them in an environment where temperatures often get down below -15, and they're still comfortable and warm inside, are costing the Turk, if you exclude the helicopter costs and all that of installing them, are around about $12,000 each. But that is with community labour, so it's a $12,000 material cost. And also, we've got to be manoeuvrable, right? A helicopter was one of my things. And we've also got to be a comfortable and enjoyable space to be in. And they are remarkably enjoyable. Being in a round space is, I never appreciated it until I made the first one. And then I thought, wow, this is a great thing to be in. So now I've got some photos going around the inside. So this is, as you can see, we've got the door on the left, and then so if we sort of work through 90 degrees, so that's my son, Tig. If you look at his right shoulder, so the left, again, I'm not sure, assuming you see what I see, it's at the left-hand side of the photo where the ski's hanging. So from there round past the seat on that plywood is the first 90 degrees. The door I deliberately made, it doesn't feel narrow, but it would be narrower than a normal house door. If you look at things like boat building and things like that, one of the rules is your hatches and portals and doors should be as small as possible. And my thinking being I should follow the same principles. Also, the mechanical stress on the door in a very high wind environment will be less if it's a bit smaller. You can see there's hooks for packs and things like that. There's a nice armchair to sit in. Each of the Turks have a unique piece of art. This was one of my things just to sort of make them enjoyable, and also in building the clubs to get a wider variety of people involved. And all of them have armchairs because I just think you need to have that. So then if we move around to the right again, actually before I go, you can see on the right is the start of the first bunk, and there's a little shelf up there for you to put your tea on. And if you go up to the top bunk, you can just see a round white thing. That's one of the lights. There's actually 5 different lights in each of these Turks. Moving round to the right, actually I'm just going to skip around a little bit here. Sorry. Have 2 bunks, which in essence form a V shape. This is my family. That's my very patient wife sitting there with 2 very tired children. So the 2 bunks, there's 2 sets of bunks, so 4 beds altogether take up the back half of the Turk, and this is just another photo of the 2 bunks looking from above. And the diagonal on those bunks is actually 2.2 metres. The mattress is a very unusual shape, as you can imagine. It's got a curved side and a shorter edge, but even someone who's 6'6" or something like that wouldn't have a problem sleeping on them. So the actual diagonal on the bunks is quite big. Another photo, and again you can see here the 4 of the bunks, the ladder in the middle. There's the wee table which fits in and can be removed, which is a great little invention in that you can take it out and then use the ladder, but equally you can put it there and you can play cards on it and sit around and have dinner. And then as we move around to the right again, we can see the cooking bench, and on the right hand side of this photo you can see the side of the door again. So it's pretty well done a whole 360. The cooking area has got some shelving down below the bench, and it's also got some shelving on the right, on the left of the photo, beside the window. And there's a bookshelf on the other side. There's a small seat near the door. So from a seating point of view, you've got this little seat here, you've got all the bunks to sit on, and you've also got the armchair. And the idea with this seat was that something as you'd come in, you'd sit down on and take your boots off and things like that. And just to sort of, this actual design that I'm showing you is pretty well my kind of 4th iteration. Like the first one I built was uninsulated, it had sort of looked quite different. And this is the sort of the evolution of the 4th version. And that sort of going through 4 versions took me pretty well 3 years. I built one behind Arrowtown, then I built ones for the Antarctic, then I built the one for the welding pine people at Mid-Dome, and by then I've worked through enough design cycles to really work out how things work or how to design things. This is just another photo, again, of the cooking area. This is looking actually out the one on Mount Vanguard, and that's the upper shot over through the window. You can see to the left there's a little bit of shelving, and equally to the right is the bookshelf. One of the thing with designing anything in something like a water tank is it's a little bit like boat building. You're working entirely with curved surfaces, and the sides of the tank being a cylinder, in essence, they're simple curves, so you can get a flat piece of plywood and you can bend it around. The challenge with a ceiling is it's a complex curve in that you can't get a flat thing in bend it onto it. So it took me quite a while to work out the best way to do this, and the thing I ended up with is this kind of duvet design for the ceiling, and again, it works very well, it looks very good. I'm actually just going to flick back a couple of slides and just show you something else. One other thing I've done, like if you look in the background of this, you'll notice this wall is this sort of deep red colour, and it's actually a synthetic felt. And I originally used that because I was concerned about condensation, and of course, when you have a very distinct step in temperature, typically on a hard surface, is when you get condensation. For example, like on a window, you have a very steep temperature gradient and you get condensation. So my idea with the sort of felt, and the synthetic felt, is it would be something which could absorb moisture to some degree at night time and then release it as the temperature warmed up during the day. And I managed to get a roll of this stuff for a few $100 off Trade Me, and everyone just loved it in the first design, so it's become a standard feature. And you know, the standard joke to start with is, you know, it made it look a bit like, you know, it's going to be like a brothel or something with this this sort of ruby red colour everywhere, but it gives it such a lovely warm feel, the combination of the wood and that red. The other thing in the Turks is they have a bookshelf, and you can see just on the top left there's a carbon monoxide monitor. So all of them were fitted with carbon monoxide monitors, and also a fire alarm, which includes a carbon monoxide monitor as well. So we've actually almost got a double redundant carbon monoxide monitor, because that would probably be the worst nightmare, is for someone to wander up to a Turk and find a whole lot of dead people in because they killed themselves with carbon monoxide. And you know, these things are cheap, they're $50 or $60 each. Down to the left is the solar control unit, and probably if I flick back here, you can just see at the top of this dark shape above the window is the battery. So they're all fitted with batteries. They've got actually 4 different lights, that one in the centre of the roof, and they've also got, if you look at the top of this ladder, you can see a bright light in there. They've got a light there and 2 reading lights above each of the bunks. So, and all of that solar, I mean, all that electronics probably cost about $500 or something like that. There's also actually a dimmer on the main light, because on the very first design, someone was up there for, it sort of had a light that was one of those kind of very harsh coloured ones, and someone had lit a candle and sort of hadn't almost burnt it down, but it had done some fire damage to it. So I thought, right, I'm going to make it so they've got no excuses. So there's an actual dimmer on the main light as well. And also in here, you can see there's a fire extinguisher to the right and a fire blanket to the left. So we're just trying to cover all those, you know, kind of safety things. Again, those things are very low cost to do, and it's good to tick them off. So a couple of things just to move on to the engineering. Now, this photo here, your biggest, other than the sort of actually physically building the structure, your biggest challenge in the mountains is wind loading. And interestingly, the sort of engineering for the New Zealand ones is actually at a higher standard for the Antarctic ones. The New Zealand is windier than where we are in the Antarctic. A lot of these ones are designed for 300 kilometre an hour wind speed, and because we weren't on public conservation land, we couldn't use their exemption to the building code, so we had to build it as at a safety level 2, whereas I think the Department of Conservation can classify it as backcountry hut and build it to a safety factor of 1.5 or a load factor of 1.5. One of the interesting things about using a water tank is it's a very aerodynamic shape. The coefficient of drag is pretty well half of what a rectangular structure is. So therefore your loadings, mechanical loadings are a lot lower. This one here, you can see there's a guy running off from the top. The newer ones don't have that, because the first one was anchored using these. And the problem with that is it's very hard to determine the strength of anchors. You know, you whack something on the ground, you say, how strong is that? The latter ones are ballasted with gravel, and I'll have some photos showing that. In this graph here is a temperature log of an uninsulated one. The very first one was uninsulated and single glazed. Subsequent ones have been insulated and a double glazed, and even in very low temperatures like low -10, you know, the temperature inside will stay quite comfortable. It's a very space efficient shape. If you work out the surface area in relation to volume, you can't get much better in this shape. The build process, basically the big advantage of the build process is you start with ready from walls and a floor. And anyone who's built everything knows that it's a great achievement when you get floor, roof and walls up. Well, with a water tank you start with it. So basically you get your water tank, you get rebraved and you saw into it. This is the very first one we designed or we built. This is another more subsequent one, which we actually did. So we did one, then we did another at my place, and then we built 5 all in one go, and I've got some photos of that. In the subsequent designs, a lot of the components I got computer cut. So you can see here these sort of nice curved bits. Basically, I designed them all on the computer. And then just cut them. In this case, those left-hand bits are out of 25mm plywood. So my design approach was very much one of standardisation and using computer cutting and things like that where possible. This is just an example of the door jamb. Your challenge is you're fitting square things like a door to a curved thing like a tank. And you can see here the curvature in the door jamb and the angles and things. And yeah, that, in some ways, that from a design point of view was initially was probably my big thing to work through is, well, how do I work between this curved interface and the square interface and get things sealed and strong enough. Other interesting problems like this one here is the bookshelf. You can see these black things. Those who have sort of bit into joinery might know what a JCB bolt is, a joint connector bolt. This is a sort of manifestation of the same thing, but the black thing is actually a 25mm nylon rod, which has been cut and a hole drilled into it. So that how we're attaching things like this is actually drilling from the outside with a gutter screw with the hex head, which have the rubber seals on, and basically through all the material and then through the wood and into this plastic thing, which is very strong. You wouldn't have enough strength if you just went into the end grain of the plywood or something. I mean, it'd probably be right for the first year, but not subsequent, whereas the nylon is very strong. This is, I've just got some photos here of the build process. So basically I worked through this design until I was at the point where it's like, I worked through the design, but at the same time also through building consents, everything like that, resource consents, LINS consents. Then once I had that down, I launched the club and asked people to donate money, and within 3 weeks we had about $80,000, and within 2 months we had over $120,000, so we just got about building them. This was the first big build day I organised. I think 50 people turned up, and I just managed, there's a big range of skills in building this, and a lot of them, ranging all the way from low skills like painting things to more skilled where, I want you to measure and cut things within a few millimeters and, put them together, and then more skill things like sort of joinery stuff to do with fitting windows and things. And there's a few things we got wrong. We should have probably made the window and window jamb as a prefabricated unit and not try and fit them in one go. But, generally the whole process worked very smoothly. And it was an incredible, community thing just to get a whole lot of people out doing things. Like there's so many people who just turned up just because they wanted to make something, wanted to be part of the group. And in some ways, it almost feels like this was the greater achievement more than actually using them, because people really like making things, and it was always one of my conclusions is that people like making stuff. And again, of all ages, that's actually my mum, that's my daughter, so Yeah, it was really good fun, great community involvement, and all I did is said we're having a building day on this day, and I'd see who turned up, and then I'd sort of wing it and try and get everyone involved. So now I'm just going to move on to the installation process, and again, this was something I sort of worked out over several iterations of doing it. We installed the one behind Arrowtown, we installed the ones that, but it was really sort of after the Antarctic ones, I really began to work out how to do it. With the Antarctic ones, we had about 50 Chinese people helping us, and it would have been hard work without them. So the installation process is this thing here, which I term the foundation square, and it's 3 metre by 3 metre square made of H4 100 by 100 fence posts that's then wrapped with a stainless steel band. And in this case, it's actually double thickness, so it's 2 on top of each other. And you can see those bits in the corner, they actually act as locators for when we fly the turk in. So this was one of our more tricky sites. We actually had to cut it into the hill. So basically we've flown up the deck and this foundation square, well, we've got it all positioned, then we came back a couple of weeks later and installed it. That's another photo of us up in the mountains. Again, moving around one of these foundation squares. So once we have that structure in place, we then move the turks. One of the challenges of the turk is they're 3.5 metres wide, so they're actually an over-width load. And on the road, they do need a pilot vehicle, which is one problem if you're trying to move them a long way. But having said that, the anchor points on the tanks are very strong, but easy to lift and move. This is a picture of flying one in below a helicopter. He reckons he generally flies, I think he said about 100 knots or 80 knots or something, which is about 150 kilometres an hour or something. So yeah, it works very well. It's worth, like we've been using Erik's got a Glenorchy helicopters in it. It is really worth getting a pilot that you're on the same wavelength with, especially when you're actually lowering them into position. I don't have many photos of lowering them into position. This is one that's me sort of in the centre. I'm typically on the radio to the pilot and also calling out the shots to the people on the ground. The process is we typically fly it in, sort of weight it so the thing loses its spin and twist, and then I call up to the pilot to slowly increase the power, not so much that he lifts it, but so that there's enough weight off it that sort of 3 or 4 people can sort of shove it into position and rotate it. And towards the end, we were, getting it was, probably a minute or 2 minutes max to actually lower it and get it in place and have it seated. So once you've got it in place, we then get a whole load of gravel. Like the earlier ones were anchored with guys. These ones don't have guys at all. They're just anchored with gravel. So part of the engineering process is we get an engineering assessment. He looks at the wind loading and basically says you need this much gravel. So for the ones behind Arrowtown, this is us down in the shot over a riverbed, bagging up gravel. And where it all goes, if you look at this picture, you can see the turk has a plywood floor, and then there's a structure, subfloor structure, joists, and a whole lot of space. And that's designed such that it can take up to 3 tonnes of gravel. And some of them we don't need that much, but 3 tonnes is the maximum. And then the floor carefully slots in, and then there's little packers that go around. This is just a picture, again, just that foundation frame. And the 2 main stresses you're trying to avoid is, the tipping, the wind loading. Like at 300 kilometres an hour, you've got a lateral force of about 2 or 3 tonnes on the structure. And the 2 things you're trying to avoid is, one is the whole thing tipping over, and the other thing is it's sliding sideways off the mountain. So the tipping is, or the 3 tons of gravel prevents the tipping, but it's not actually enough to prevent the sliding, because the tank is bolted through the floor onto the wooden frame, and then the wooden frame kind of is actually recessed 50 millimetres into the ground, to slide sideways it would have to bulldoze the ground. So that is an overview of the Turks. I've just got a few final photos. This is just the one up behind Arrowtown. You can see behind the Turk, you can see the sort of Queenstown Basin and things. This is another picture of one of the Turks. This is the actual original Arrowtown one, which just goes to sort of give you an idea of some of the more extreme weather they have to put up with. And this is one, just you can see with the armchair outside and the lake in the background, just to sit and relax and drink wine and things. So that's my that's an overview of Turks. So just to give you just one more thing before I sort of let you fire away questions. So the club built 6 of these Turks, and the complete cost for all 6, including all the helicopter times, resource consents and everything, was 120,000. So each Turk, like the one you're seeing there, cost 20,000. And a rough breakdown of that would be the water tank itself costs $3,000. So actually 20,000 including GST. So the water tank costs $3,000. The plywood would be about $2,000. The mattresses and internal fit outs would be about $1,500. The electrical system, about $500. The guttering and water tank system, about another probably $700. The helicopter fees to fly them all in and fly at gravel was about $4,000 per Turk. The resource consents and the various consents and things are about $1,500. Now, it's $1,500 because I hit up a whole lot of companies like Boffa Miskel and Patch Landscape and Anderson Lloyd, who did all of the club's work pro bono. So the $7,000 was what council charged us. And I think that roughly adds up somewhere to about 20,000 per Turk. So if you were to build one for your backyard, it would cost, and also the toilets cost about $1,000 each. We had to build them as well. So if you were to build one, just a Turk, as you see there, for your backyard, it would be sort of around about 11,000, 11 to 12,000, and that would be fully kitted out with a coffee maker and knives and forks and things like that. Yeah, so that's it. Fire away some questions.
Thank you, Erik. Right. Any questions?
I'm curious as to the ventilation system. You're 4 people in that confined space, so you must have some very good ventilation.
Did you hear that? Ventilation.
Yep, I heard that. Okay, 2 things. The window opens, which is good ventilation.
Yeah.
If it's an interesting thing to look at ventilation. If the best research on all of this is actually NASA, because NASA's worked a lot of this out because of this International Space Station. Amazingly enough, 4 people could actually happily breathe in there for over 24 hours without opening a door or a window. Yeah. So it's not as much of a problem as you think. But what I am progressively working through is, you see the black panel in the middle of the Turk, that's actually a heat collector. And I'm actually also working on a sort of heat exchanger so I can vent air without losing thermal energy. And it's a sort of 3D printed thing. So at the moment, people just open a window a little bit. But ultimately, I want it such that you can keep the window and door completely closed, and the thing will ventilate itself. And also, it has temperature sensors, so I can go, I've got sun on this black panel, it's warm, the gravel in the floor is at 5 degrees, I'm going to vent air down and warm up the gravel because I want to make use of that thermal mass to keep it warm. So, yeah, to answer your question, it's not really, it hasn't presented itself as a problem, and equally, you know, I plan to improve it and refine it and make clever use of the sort of thermal mass under the floor and things.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you very much.
Can you tell us more about that black panel? What are them?
Can you talk more about the black panel?
Yeah, okay, so that was, I mentioned it in that previous question. I'm just going to go back to the photo. If we just look at, you see in the middle of here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, there's this vertical white pipe with a black box at the top. So what's happening there is air is being drawn in up that black panel and then being vented down into the gravel under the floor, and there's a circular pipe under the floor. And I initially did this because the gravel, well, actually, it was set up this way because I wanted to make use of the thermal mass of the gravel under the floor, but I actually had to get it going because all the gravel we put in under the floor was wet when we put it in, and I needed to dry it out. And it actually dried out very nicely. So the idea of that black panel is air is drawn up through that and then vented down under the floor. And if you've got 3 tons of gravel under the floor but within the structure, and you can warm that up to say 15 or 20 degrees, that will slowly radiate its heat during the night. And the bit I'm working on with a bit of technical stuff is a little bit of computer powered, you know, by computer I mean a very simple computer, a $20 computer, that can make some degree of intelligent decisions about when to turn fans on and things like that. So yeah, the black panel is really just about trying to capture some more thermal energy.
Thank you. One more? Yes.
Are you able to talk more about the insulation? I assume there's no like added insulation like pink pads. Is that pink felt added directly onto the water tap?
Did you hear that?
Yeah. So yes, they are all insulated and double glazed. The first one wasn't. The first one wasn't. The second ones I built, we used a insulation which was it was a food grade sort of sheet product that we could bend on, and we used this for the Antarctic ones, about 20 or 25 millimeters thick, and it was a bit like a sleeping mat kind of material, but they use it on things like wine vats and things like that to keep them warm. It was just cheaper than sleeping mats. We used that, but the problem is we couldn't really do much in the ceiling space with that. So these ones we used spray foam insulation, which is probably the kind of crappiest part of the whole build thing, because you spray it on and then you've got to kind of trim it back to fit everything on. But having said that, it seems to have worked very well. I was dubious at first that it would stick to the plastic, but I had a sample and it actually stuck really well. But then it does seem to separate off from the plastic, because I was climbing on the roof of one of these and I noticed there was a sort of, you could feel this gap between the roof and the plastic. But it's actually strong enough that I think the foam has more rigidity than the whole structure. So, you know, overall it's worked very well. But I would say we're still in that stage where, you know, we built these things a year and a half ago, and we're still, you know, we're not exactly sure of the lifespan of them. We're anticipating 10 years, and then we'll swap it out and put a new one in. Yeah. So, yeah, the insulations work well, and it's spray foam.
Did you have your hand up? I'll take you.
Yeah. I was just going to ask about you made mention of a toilet sort of at the latter stages there. Was there an external bathroom, or how does that work?
So basically these ones have just got long drop toilets. For a small hut, that's more than adequate. We have a design I called the Dymaxion toilet, because while I was working with these designs, I was rather sort of amused by it. An architect called Buckminster Fuller, who invented the geodesic dome of Venice as well as various other things, and he came up with this term of Dymaxion. So there is a toilet design that we've used, and it's a design such that you could actually ideally, carry it actually into the mountains and with about 5 or 6 different people. But when you look at the regulations, you don't want to have any sinks or plumbing or piping within the structure. You then get into more complex building regulation requirements. So really what there is a water tank outside with a tap, and there's a long drop toilet, and then there's, you can wash your hands in the tap, and, then there's buckets and pots and pans and things like that.
So it's real southern stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Erik.
it's a mountain hut.
If you're going into the backdrops, it's not plush Astoria Waldorf. No. Okay. So
No, it's not, like walking the Milford Track. I mean, they're actually a lot flasher as far as huts go than the Milford Track, but you don't have flush toilets or anything like that. I mean, if you're not careful, you can spend more money on the toilet than the hut. And that's a pretty sad course of events.
thank you very much. Appreciate that. Now, our second speaker was supposed to come from Doc to talk about Doc Huts. I got an email just before tea tonight to say that he was unwell, so he's not coming. However, we do have Robin McNeil. Now, I googled Robin as well. Auntie Google is really helpful. Do you want to pop over there while I talk? I read his biography, and I got the distinct impression that his life is heavily engaged in space. Not only is he in charge of Southland's participation in the various international space programs, but he spends time in the great outdoors enjoying the wide open spaces of Fiordland and Southland, and what they have to offer for tramping, climbing and hunting. Tonight he's going to talk about that terrestrial hobby when he's ready. Thank you, Robin.
My mask off too. Kia ora tēnā koutou katoa. So actually before, is Erik still listening to us, or is he?
Yes.
Gone? Yeah. So Erik, Erik's just a little bit too modest, I think, for his own good. Those Turks are really innovative, imaginative thinking, and although he's got CNC cut out plywood and everything, the amount of reuse of all the plywood, I think there's hardly any plywood left over, and it just shows what you can do if you apply modern engineering and modern thinking with modern materials to come up with an innovative solution. And so Erik's an engineer as well, actually, but unreformed. He also he's also amazingly fit. He's a legend in the outdoor world. Every year when he turns another year old, he does a solo ascent of Mount Aspiring to the Tier. I don't know if you've done it yet.
It's a few weeks I'm going to do it.
2 weeks, yeah, okay. So in a day from the car park, and it's going to take me about a week in November, but yeah, anyway, it's Erik. He's a living legend. So yeah, thanks very much, Erik. So I'm a bit more basic, and I'm going to come back to some principles, and that is when we go off tramping, which is what I'm going to be talking about. When you're out in the sunny weather, in the middle of winter, actually the rain's gone solid, you sort of, the idea of sleeping out in this isn't a great attraction. You sort of think you might need somewhere better to live, and my standby actually is something that looks like that, a tent, but sort of a 2-person tent with 3 people in it, so loud, the rain's so loud on it you can't hear yourself speak, let alone the cook, just about asphyxiate, and it's only a matter of time before your sleeping bag gets a bit wet. So sometimes you want something a little bit more robust, and so if you head off into the hills, what could be more basic, more fundamental, more human, more Paleolithic than sleeping under a rock? or bivvy rock or bivouac for sleeping out, and this is one of the more famous ones of Mark's Flat up the Lensborough Valley, just out of Haast, and there's nothing quite like being in a bivvy rock, in your sleeping bag, watching the snow, a brew going you have from your sleeping bag, and you can just sloth away an entire morning, the whole day if it's snowing really heavily enough, and you've got the space, it's got a solidity that you don't really get in a hut, but you can see all of nature all around you, and you can enjoy the environment. I'm never quite sure in a lightning storm whether this is a good place or a really bad place, because, well, lightning's pretty weird. I've got half a career in trying to figure out lightning in remote, rural, hilltop mountains, top radio stations, and I don't really know what the answer is. Anyway, I'll take you to another bivvy rock just to give you a bit of light relief. We're going up here, over there on the back of the place called the Olivine Ice Plat up the back of Glenorchy, and this is another famous rock bivvy here. This is the Forgotten River, and again, you sort of big imposing piece of rock, and just beautiful inside. You can have a cup of tea and dry out and watch the rain. And when you're in a tent, you're always a little bit nervous about condensation. Some of the really best bivvy rocks, there's one in just out of Milford Sound or from Homer Tunnel, Gill's Bivvy, where you can actually, there's a little stream that flows through the bivvy rock. You can actually make your cups of tea and without even getting out, and refill the billy without even getting out of your sleeping bag. And then there's another one that's in the Oliver, the Beansburn, and that's equally famous. So they are sprinkled around. I found one once up the north branch of the Rootburn where I said, it started to rain. I said, look, I've been told there's dozens of bivvy rocks here. Look, there's one just here. We moved in and spent the afternoon tidying it up. It's the only one in for miles, but anyway, I didn't know that at the time. A few years ago, I did a shot. There's a guy called Marcus Lush, but you probably know, and we made a movie. It's called South, and he wanted to know if I could guide him around the south coast. And I said, well, I'm not going to guide you because I have to get a permit, and that means we'd have to get a health and safety. I asked him, how about we just do it? He pays for the helicopter and we'll go. And one of the highlights, we were going to go to Pusica Point, and but it's a long story. Go watch the video. I think it's still around. But one of the neat things was we came across one of these. It's a cave just on the south coast, miles from anywhere, and they said they were kiwi fruit farms from Te Puke, but actually one of them was a coroner at Jenin afterwards. And,
That's helpful.
so did out the side. But what we have here is a genuine sealer's cave, and Maori would have been using it way back before then too. And so some of these places have got just real history. This party that we bummed into, they sort of go there every year, fly in with a helicopter. Otherwise, it's about a week's walking in to get to it, and it's not really easy landing in a boat. Well, the sailors obviously must have. And just no one goes there. We have the most fantastic coast down the south coast on the way to between the Humpbridge Track and all the way, well, actually to Waiwai Bay, all the way around to Pusica Point. Just amazing scenery. But anyway, enough on bivvy rocks. I'll talk about another way of getting huts into the backcountry. So there's an outfit called Permalat. The Permalat Trust was invented by a guy in Christchurch, West Coast, sort of both really, called Andrew Buglas. And he got sort of sick of Doc not looking after backcountry huts. There's about 1,000 huts in the backcountry of New Zealand that are managed, technically owned by Doc. And a lot of them range from forestry huts that were put into the Forest Service days before Doc. Some of them are early ones are bivvies, and then there's a whole variety of hunters' huts and so forth. And there's a whole variety of others as well. And Doc, from about the 1990s through to more recent years, has sort of considered these huts. They're only used by 2 to 4 people at a time. No one much was using them compared to a great walk. Actually, do we really need them? And the outdoor fraternity, and I'm I've been involved in backcountry advocacy and politics for about 30 years now. We sort of said, well, actually, we've got to do something. And so Andrew set up Permalat, which was completely anarchistic. Like, I mean, the idea of Andrew or his mates in the Permalat, or Permalat is there's enough grey hair, younger people won't know, but there used to be stuff you could make Venetian blinds out of, and you could get it in red or white. I don't know why do a Venetian blind in red. But anyway, if you chopped it up, the forestry service found you could use it as track markers, put a galvanised flathead nail through it, and that's Permalat. So that's the name of the trust. And complete anathema to docking of orange triangles for their track markers. So Andrew would just sort of say this hut needs doing up. They club around, get a bit of money, and go out and fix it up. And whether Doc worried about it or not was not something that Andrew cared about really. To be fair, people like Kevin O'Connor, who was Deputy Director General, and Lou Sanson were actually highly supportive. He was the Director General until just a month ago, and lived down here for a while. And so actually they gave Andrew some money, and but he never still in the bank account. But anyway, there was a thought of Doc was saying, well, actually we do need to be about 2014 a way of which we can we make this more, this idea of having community partnership. And so Kevin O'Connor, who used to be the Conservator down here at one stage, and forestry down here even before that in the department, rustled up with another guy called Rob Brown, who's a photographer, and I was the president of Federated Mountain Clubs at the time, and so we got in with Trail Funder, which is a mountain bike outfit, the Deer Stalkers Association, and we formed this thing, New Zealand Outdoor Consortium, and the plan was to snaffle up some money that looked like it was going begging to be saving kakapo or kakako or something else that needed it, to instead look after huts. And we were a bit more successful than I thought. We and it had a number of approaches to it. I mean, okay, bad luck for the kakapo who didn't get saved, but what we wanted to do was say, actually, how can recreationalists, trampers, hunters, mainly, be involved in looking after huts and tracks. I mean, clubs have looked after huts, and like our Southland section of the Alpine Club, we look after Homer Hut, and we used to look after, on the way to Milford Sound, we used to look after Esquill and Bivvy on Wright's Coal below Mount Earnslaw until we handed it over to the Targo section to look after. And so there has been, in the Tararuas out of Wellington, there's been a long involvement of clubs looking after huts. And we sort of felt there was a need to put something rather back into that country. We felt that the Department of Conservation hadn't been encouraging volunteer efforts at all, in spite of what people like Andrew were doing. And so out of that, Kevin O'Connor and Robin, another famous champion named Jess Bearpoint, and myself we plotted up a scheme, and we snaffled in the money in the Docks Community Fund, and we managed to get $1.25 million out of it, which was mainly because I'd spent some time working in New Zealand Post Office and understood how bureaucracy went, and so therefore I knew if we applied for twice as much money as we needed, we would get cut down to what we would, it didn't work, we got the whole lot. So we had some real risk, especially Federated Mountain Clubs, which is, a real advocacy group, were we supporting a neoliberalism paradigm? And that was something rather that we were not keen to support, because people would say, and also, was this going to be 30 into the wedge for the Department of Conservation to lump all its 1,000 huts onto volunteers? Well, it's only so much volunteers can do, we thought. And, these was, Doc had, basically in their brief was to look after these 1,000 huts, and if they weren't doing it, through taxes, then, what was their job? And what's it going to wreck FMC if we got it wrong? But then again, I pointed out, if we didn't take it on, what was going to happen? Anyway, I managed to persuade everyone FMC it was a great idea. You need a good people. Here's Jess Bearpoint here, North Flat mate of mine here, Hugh Van Norden, and they did some really neat work in the tunnel burn, which is up the west coast, and you see a beautifully restored Forest Service hut, not quite a Forest Service orange, but pretty good. And that things like that, some really keen, energetic people who were prepared, who had real mana, could really sort of influence things to happen. And so those first 2 years we got quite a bit to happen. We spent nearly as much of the money as we could possibly get through. And some of the restorations were, once you took the lid off, there was pretty sad underneath, but hey, when you finished, it was actually looking pretty darn good. And we sort of ended up in a position where we were having the Minister and the Department and the Director General sort of touting us as sort of, the wonders of what we could do. That's my Otago University students at K Creek Hut, and sort of there's still some misogyny in different parts of the world among some builders and some people on dock, to be honest. And the idea of women trying to do up a hut is sort of sits a little uneasily, but I think it's fantastic. And so what do we achieve in the 2 years we were trying to do this? Well, basically we funded over 100 projects around the countryside. We weren't saying like Doc was, well, here's our list of priorities and spending thousands of man hours, person hours, trying to work out what the priority should be. We said, if someone wants to spend some money doing up a hut, then they must have a reason to want to do it. And if they want to do it that hut rather than another hut, good on them. And so we figured it was a self-generating system of setting the priorities. And we got volunteers inspired, and they got other people on to other projects. One of the really cool things was we recreated the culture that the huts are ours in the wider sense, and we were the richer for it. We learned how to work with Doc a bit, and some Doc staff and some people over at Stewart Island are fantastic, and there were some other people. Some of them probably need to move on, who are still trying to find their way into the 20th century, I mean, it's really neat people on Dock, and some of them just need to find another job, But one of the big things that came out of it, and I remember when Eugenie Sage was the Minister, and she wasn't too happy about this at the time, Minister of Conservation, and she didn't like the idea of, was this neoliberalism, and really this was the government's job. But as I pointed out to her, we've changed the whole mindset from Doc should fix their huts, shouldn't they, and whinge, to, hey, we can help Doc look after our huts, can't we? And that was probably as big a thing as anything. And it's also pointed out to Eugenie that some people like doing up vintage cars. A lot of us restore houses. Actually, some people really enjoy doing up vintage huts. I mean, they're all about my age and older, some of them, so why not? So what else do we get out of this? Well, we realised, Lou Santon was the Director General of Doc, and Kevin had moved on into fire service at that point, that this model worked. I mean, we had the Minister touting this as a great example of community involvement. We had the DG, so we set up a thing called the Backcountry Trust. Now these slides are from my mate Rob Brown, who sort of now is the manager of this, and it's gone from strength to strength. So here, this is his slides, which he managed to get to me because he's been out and doing Stewart Island huts and things. But 2017, so it was basically got set up. So it's bulk funded from the Department of Conservation now at $550,000 a year, which is about right. It's what the trust can do, and it's also, having said that, it's also now got, I don't think he's got it here, but also the Kaumaki for Nature, that's all the tourist operators and guides and things who, due to COVID, have got no one to guide anymore, and so there's a certain amount of those are now actually taking on jobs, under the Backcountry Trust to be involved. So there's a bit more money now, which is taking a bit more management, and then, of course, there's always the debate: well, are we now becoming a professional hut looking after outfit, or are we actually still there for the amateurs? So so Rob's got through $1.6 million for the first 4 years, which is pretty good, and he's done 150 huts, and so it's 300 volunteers, and there's a lot of so having the paid staff there. So there's Rob full time, and then there's Megan and what's his name, who part time. They've managed to you know, in the North Island and the South Island, they can actually get a much better resource, and so that's gone extraordinarily well, and you can see a few examples there. So it's not just on huts, they're also working on tracks, and you can see it all going on here. Some of the restorations, I have to say, are pretty, if I call them restorations, sort of, start with a pretty seedy looking hut, and hey, there's nothing wrong with the floor. So what you have to do is put the cladding back on. Actually, I think, yes, they sort of usually keep the original, the floor and the cladding, it all goes back on again, and it all works out pretty well. There's another example here. Also putting extra toilets in, and so this idea of actually you can have betterment as well as just restoration, so wood sheds as well, and just lift the standard, not trying to go for another $3 million hut like they just finished building up the Mintara on the Milford track. I mean, you can do things that are much cheaper, and actually there's a whole mindset. Why do we want huts in the first place? And some of it is actually, it's not we want to live in a big barn. No one really much enjoys that, but a little hut with 6 bunks in it where you can get to know people. And certainly some of my colleagues in the backcountry view, you know, a hut should be no bigger than, they reckon 8 to 10 people is the biggest the hut should be. And if you don't know everyone else in the hut better, by the time you get, climb into your sleeping bag that night, then basically it's not work. And I was actually at a conference in Chamonix 3 years ago, a Sustainable Summits conference, and there was a hut there in Savins National Park where they wanted to rebuild this classic hut, and the architect gave this, I forget his name, gave a wonderful talk saying, oh well, he'd been an architect from Milan, he was going to have this wonderful big hut, and it was a statement. And then after a while, all the climbers and the mountaineers just went crook, and they said, no, this is not what we want, we hate it. And he felt really upset, but anyway, he spent some time in the huts, and he suddenly realised that what you get out of huts is, okay, you've got a dry bed, and it's still dry in the morning, and you've got somewhere to cook and something to sit on, but equally, you've met people and you're sharing food, and if you think about that as another fundamental way in which humans think, that's a pretty cool way. So I can give you, and cite all that, I can dig the papers out for you from that conference, and that guy now makes a bit of a living telling the story, which is, I guess. But so it's not just, so the trust, backcountry trust generally doesn't own anything. The rules have to be based on public conservation land. Or some people would call it dock land, but that's incorrect. It's public conservation land. It's our land that DOC manage for us. But also they do own some assets, and this is a hut for the late Andy Dennis on the Mataki range on the west coast, and basically who is going to own this hut. And DOC, last thing DOC want is to have something rather gifted to them. If you're going to die and you want to bequeath all your fortune to huts and tracks in New Zealand, do not give it to DOC, because they won't thank you for it, and nor will anyone else, because they get hit by a thing called a capital asset charge, and they've got to basically, if it's at 10% of the value of that hut or bridge or track or whatever it is, now gets siphoned off to Treasury each year, plus the depreciations. They take a big financial hit, and so that $3 million hut up the that's just gone in up the Wilford track is now going to wallop all the other Southland backcountry huts by in the order of $30,000. Probably, at least probably more like $100,000 a year for the privilege of having that, and that's money that can't be spent on other things. It's just, anyway, that's financial smoke and mirrors, and there's nothing we can do about it, and whether it's a good thing or not, I don't know. So anyway, closer to home, some of the Andrew Berglass's mates from Canterbury, and I've just forgotten his name, it'll come to me, I hope, moved down to Southland about 4 years ago now and set up permanent Southland, and so they've been pretty active restoring tracks and huts around Southland, and if you're really desperate, ask me, but better still just go to permaletssouthland.nz website and you can go and give them a hand. And there's quite a team of them, so I'd like to be involved, but I seem to be a bit busy these days doing other things, which is a bit of a pain. Anyway, so that's the Takitimu Mountains, I wonder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just hardly anyone goes in there, and it's full of huts and 2-bunk huts, and nobody ever goes in it. It's been, I shouldn't told you about them all. But anyway, that's a little bit. So that's my talk, and if there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Right, questions? Where are the huts?
Professor Anderson.
If you want to stay in a hut, how do you go about it?
Open the door, move in.
So no booking?
So, yeah, obviously there's different sorts of grades of huts around. So our man from Doc, if he'd come tonight, would have explained all this, I guess, but I'll stand in for him. So the Department of Conservation have a whole range of different grades of huts, and so the ones that most people would be aware of would be, the Great Walks huts, and they're sort of 40 bunk. I won't say barns, but 40. No, actually, I think they're bigger. 80 bunks, I think, some of them. That's huge, but you have to book in advance. And at the moment, it would seem like you have to book in the first 15 minutes of the booking season opening. You can go there, and then you pay as much as you would in a motel. Alternatively, you can go there in winter. You can't book it. There's no warden. There's no gas. The flushing toilet's turned off, but the long drop still works. And I don't know if they've got coal or not, I don't think they do. So that's that, but you're supposed to pay some hut tickets. You can get hut tickets from Doc. Don't ask me how, because it'd make it really hard for you to do that, or have a annual hut pass. And it's, I don't know, that $12 a night, I think. Then there's another grade of hut, which are like some of the ones around the lakes down here. The Princhester base hut, and I think that's also $12. There's no, it's a 6-bunk forestry hut, like built in the New Zealand Forest Service days. And then there's all these other huts, like 2-bunk forestry bivvies and huts in Southland and so forth, and they're free. So you just turn up, and the rule is you try and make the place look prettier and tidier and cleaner when you leave than it was when you left, than when you arrived. So that's pretty much it.
Are there maps to show where all these are?
Yeah, you can. So you can buy my guidebook, except it's been out of print for 5 years now, so so you can't. But someone might have a copy. I don't. Or you go to the Doc website, and there is a ton of pamphlets you can download in PDF format to, or tell you the times. You don't need my book. You get the times and the tracks and the size of the huts and things like that. And yeah, it's all pretty straightforward. And there are other online facilities like ztramper.com and remote huts. They'll tell you, remote huts website from Permalet. They will tell you, what the track conditions are like and what the hut condition is.
Shall I set up the computer so that Erik can tell how people can stay in Turks if they want to?
That's a good idea.
I'll unplug yours.
Unplug that, you don't need that.
Any other question while that's been
If
said?
you plug you in, and you can tell people how.
What's my book called? It's called Moya's Guide South.
Just a moment.
It's about 7th edition or something. Yeah, if you can wait till in a year or two, I might have. People are hounding me for another edition, so it's been a bit busy. Yeah, Moya's Guide South. It's been around since 1935, and I'm the editor, but technically, yes.
So that Kevin O'Connor, did you say he was the Conservator of Forests?
He was the Conservator for Southland for Department of Conservation, and then he was Deputy Director General of Conservation, and then he went off and headed the Rural Fire Service, and then just recently did a short stint as acting Deputy Director General in DOC.
Okay, because I'm trying to get a hold of anyone I can in that sort of area. My great-grandfather was the Conservator of Forests many decades ago.
Down here?
Yeah, here, and he went all over the world and did things and then he, Norman Dollamore was his name, you can Google him, he's quite famous all over the
Isn't
internet.
Dollamore part Dollamore?
Yeah, that's a family thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got his book. He's written this old book back in the day. But it's quite. I tried to get hold of people up at our national. What would you call it? Up at our national museum, and they had written out they brought out a book on conservatorship of forests, and I said, well, if his name ain't in it, there's a trouble. So I rang them and said, is there any part of that book that's got him in it, his name in it, because he's quite famous on the internet. And they didn't get hold of me. It was about 2 years ago.
Rachel Edgerton.
I thought it'd be quite good maybe to talk to this Kevin O'Connor, see what he knows.
Yeah, Rachel Edgerton.
Yep, I know Rachel.
So she'd probably be a good source to sort of get started on those sorts of things, I think.
Yeah. People get a bit confused because I've actually got an uncle, Norman Dollamore, as well, but he's the grandson, so there's the two names.
Yeah.
But he's still alive, the other one's not.
So Erik, the question is about how does one book in to a Turk?
Okay, so I'll just explain the economic model of the Turk Club. So unlike huts on public conservation land, all the money and all the costs for installing and developing the Turks was donated money. There was absolutely zero government money involved at all. So what the model we've come up with is there's two ways to stay in. Well, there's three actually. Sorry, there's three ways. You can join the club through helping build the Turks or doing something useful. And at the moment, there isn't a huge amount going on. We've got a maintenance trip coming up. We're building some actually toilets to go around the other, where the Turks are on a block of land called the Mahu Whenua Covenant, which is a Kiwitui covenant, so we're actually helping build some infrastructure there. So there's projects that are happening that allow you to join the club by doing some work and things, or you can join the club by contributing materials. And basically it's a once in a lifetime thing. So once you've contributed some materials to a Turk, you're then a Turk Club member and you pay $20 a night to stay in the Turk. And the kind of minimum amount of material to donate is $300 worth. So it's a once in a lifetime, you say, okay, I'm going to donate 10 sheets of plywood or something. But basically it's recognised financially. Also, you can stay in a Turk just as a non-member, and our non-member rate is basically the same as one of the Great Hawks rates. So either you're a member or you're not, then you just go to our website and you can book, and we've got a booking system, so you book yourself in for a night. Because they're relatively small, we thought it important to be able to actually sort of book yourself in. So yeah, it's either $20 if you're a member, $70 if you're not, or you can join and then you just book yourself in.
Thank you very much. Right. Any other questions? Oh, thank you very much, Robin. Your enthusiasm is catchy. For most of them, I'm not sure I've caught it. At my age and stage, I never liked tramping anyway. Thank you for attending. This is our last session for the year, our 14th evening. What do I need to tell you? Thank you to many of you who have travelled this journey with us right from the start. Thank you to Maria, who suggested this series of alternative housing options and who films it and then puts it up on YouTube, South Alive YouTube. And thank you to the rest of the housing group who have faithfully turned up to ensure that the rooms are set up and broken down appropriately and pre-COVID fed and watered us. Now our next event will be on Tuesday the 15th of February 2022. I hate saying that date. 2022. I haven't finished with Easter yet. The focus will be somewhat different again, still on housing though. South Alive partners with the local fire service, which brings its expertise to a number of our events, including the Children's Holiday Program. And they have asked, and we have happily agreed, to bring us a safety in the home presentation. Some of you may have seen at one of our earlier ones a table full of burnt implements, or seen the photograph in the Southern Times of the burnt out filter from a ceiling of a heating unit. They've got very real local stories to share, and will also offer to check your homes for hazards. So keep an eye open for that in February. In the meantime, enjoy a Christmas of peace, a summer break, and we look forward to seeing you back in a COVID